What I thought perhaps we would do to start is how each one of you got involved with these great movements. I'm guessing, Suzanne, that yours was the women's movement. Civil rights and perhaps environment. So let's do it in more or less that order. Tell us, Suzanne, go back to that point in the early part of the 60s, when 70s, when they weren't called ladies, or they were called ladies, and they started being called women. Talk a little bit about how the women's movement came together, your own role in it, and project forward again, always bearing in mind that our big question is, what do we do now?
Well, I can't tell you how amazing it is to be at the birth of a new movement. The women's movement framed my first adulthood. It framed my life. I cannot imagine the person I would be now if it weren't for the women's movement. And to come to this place and to be looking ahead at the birth of another movement is a blessing that is nobody could imagine. Like many people who came into movements, I didn't know what was happening at the time. I see myself more as a purveyor of the movement than a founder. I am not the kind of visionary that Mark Friedman is or Gloria Steinem was for the women's movement. But I came into the movement in a way that I think many people will come into our new movement. So I will describe to you how I came to work at Ms. Magazine in the spring of 1972. At that point, I was an extremely conventional person. Actually, I came to work my first day at Ms. in a pink silk blouse and a pink cashmere skirt, and I was shown my desk, which was a small box with a folding chair in front of it. And I thought, I'm going to have to get with the program here. I came out of a fairly conventional life up until then, and I was well on the way to a career in women's magazines. I had worked at Mademoiselle and Ms., it makes a point, and at McCall's magazine. And I was at the time working at a magazine, ridiculous magazine called Sexual Behavior, which was published by a pharmaceutical company. But when Ms. came out, as you may know, the first issue of Ms. was published within New York Magazine in the winter of 71, 72. And nobody thought it would take off, and instead it sold out in 5 days. And I was one of the people who bought a copy. I think I bought it more as a journalist curious about a new magazine. And there was fascinating articles in there. There was an article by a woman who said what we all need is a wife. There were articles in there about marriage contracts. There was an article about body hair. There was an article about lesbian love. And there was a feature, a spread, that the headline was, "We have had an abortion." And it was the names of well-known people who were admitting that they had had an abortion. As I am sure this crowd knows well, this was before Roe v. Wade. And then there was a coupon on the bottom and said, if you have had an abortion, fill this coupon out, send it in to Ms., and we will publish more names in future issues. And I was so struck by that because I had never told anybody that I had had an abortion. And there was something about the invitation and the community that made me fill it out. And I filled it out and I sent it in and I went back to work at Sexual Behavior magazine. And soon after that, and I consider it my good fortune, because I was young enough and wasn't earning a big enough salary to be able to make a move, and because I knew a few people who were involved with Ms., I was invited to come over and talk to them. And it turned out that I was the only person any of them knew who had run a magazine. Most of the people at Ms., and as in most movements, came out of other social justice movements. There were a lot of people who had gotten their energy from the civil rights movement, from the anti-war movement, and from the beginnings of the women's movement, the very radical side and the conventional side. There was an editor there who had been working for women's rights in the workplace and women's right to earn the same as men. It was a totally mixed group of people, all of whom were there because of the idea, not because of the magazine. So I came in as the person who was the magazine person. And what was amazing was...
do you think, Suzanne, do you think at the time you got involved that you understood what feminism was?
Absolutely not.
So you saw yourself essentially as a young professional.
Exactly.
And you found that you were surrounded by these other people who were mission-driven and you could serve a purpose.
That's exactly right.
And you'd had an abortion.
And I'd had an abortion, so that was my credential. Right?
Good.
But what was amazing was that when I went to work the first week or month, I got to open the envelope that had my petition in it. And I thought, this is some kind of a miracle. And then over time, as I began to deal with the issues that became so self-evident and so infuriating, I became more and more committed and angry and fierce and all those things that one has to be. So now that I look at it, though, there are a few things about how I got sucked in that seem to me general principles. One is that a movement needs a vision. And the fact that Gloria Steinem had the vision for this magazine, other people had visions in the women's movement that were also very powerful. But in my case, it was her vision for the magazine that became the focus. The other thing is that it created a mindset in which I felt I was not alone and that I wasn't crazy. And I do think that a movement has to give people the sense of community and reassurance. And the fact that I felt invited to talk about something that had been such a big secret in my life was the beginning of feeling part of that community. Plus, you need organizing tools. And I think that little coupon was a brilliant organizing tool at that moment. Once you begin to share life experience, once you begin to uncover where the injustices are and begin to understand that you're not crazy to be angry, you begin to act. And as Gloria Steinem always says, she says, the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. And I think that's the essence of a movement.
That's a great start. Professor Carson, that movement, that origin, the Ms., after all, it started inside New York Magazine, right? It didn't start in the South. It didn't start with sit-ins. It didn't start with segregation. What was it, you think, that made it possible relatively recently, in the middle of the 20th century, for the civil rights movement to get the kind of traction that it did? Where were the forces that came together at that moment, post-World War II, perhaps?
Well, I think for many of us, it was a lot of local things, having to do with the Jim Crow system, all the resentments that were built up over the years, and the way I look at it is that...
I just want to be sure everybody can hear in the back.
The way I would look at it is that